Welcome to another episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast. My name is Matt Welch, being joined by Bryan Murphy and Devin Hasson. Gentlemen, once again, it is a Thursday, and would you look at it, we are out here at Kelly's Craft Tavern here in Frisco. Once again, to bring you another episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast. Yes, if you are getting off of work and you want to find a spot to wind down for the evening, swing on by Kelly's. Try out one of the many craft beers they have here at their full-service bar, alongside some made-from-scratch food. That is Kelly's Craft Tavern, located at Preston Ridge on the west side of Preston, just north of 121. And yes, once again, a big thanks to Kelly's for having us out to talk some high school sports. So, this is right now, I guess, a busy season in high school sports coverage. You know, we've got the high school basketball playoffs are in full swing. Soccer is reaching the most important part of its regular season. We just had baseball and softball get going, and then we just finished wrestling and swimming, and that means golf and tennis and track are coming up. It's really this is about as crazy as it gets for us. But we're going to actually deviate off track for the first part of this podcast and talk about one of the you can call it one of the perks of the job. This is one thing about being a high school sports reporter in the Dallas area is that I'd say pound for pound, and you guys can speak to this just as well. I mean, the talent level within just the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex is just pound for pound across the country about as strong as there is. I mean, just from the top shelf teams, the athletes. I mean, it's across all sports. It's not just in your the heavyweight sports like football and basketball and whatnot. You have just 5-star athletes just all across the board within this area. And as reporters, one of the unique perks is once you stumble onto being able to cover a once in a generation talent, the kind of player that you see like, okay, that's someone who fingers crossed one day they could do big things in college, and then maybe with a little bit of luck go on and have some success in the pros. So we've had our chances over the years to see some athletes who very much fit that mold, and you know what? That's what we're gonna take a nice little stroll down memory lane, talk about some of the former high school athletes from our coverage area who are now doing it big over in the pros. We'll just chat a bit about that and just kind of see where it goes, because Devin, I'm sure you've got plenty to bring to the table on this.
Are you dating me?
There's really no easy way to bring that up.
The gray in the goatee doesn't tip it off. So.
You can't see the gray in the goatee from the camera. So
sure you can.
Dude, I'm not far behind you, man. But yeah, so as far as where to start with this, I don't know, Devin. Yeah, what was the first thing that kind of sprung to mind just in your time around? Whether it was through your coverage in Rowlett or Mesquite or some other aspect of your career. What is one example of just some really notable high school athlete that you've seen that's now gone on to have a significant pro career?
Well, I got kind of spoiled from the start. When I was interning back at the Garland paper years ago, the first sports story I did was on a feature on Derek Dockery, who was offensive lineman at Lakeview at the time, went on to UT, then went on to a 10-year career in the NFL. Mm-hmm. I mean, this guy, he was 6'5", 300 pounds in senior year in high school. And, so that was one of the things. And then I didn't, that was just an internship. And then when I got back, this is, one of my first assignments, I was with the Dallas Morning News. So full disclosure there. I got sent down to Houston to see Madison play. Mm-hmm. And they had a quarterback they wanted me to check out, do a story on. Well, the quarterback was Vince Young, who to this day is still the best high school player I've ever seen. Mm-hmm. And obviously didn't have quite the NFL career, but there's one of those guys you could point at high school and say he's going to be a star. Yeah. But kind of one of my other earliest recollections is on the basketball side of things, and that was, I guess, that class of 2002. Again, dating myself, but that was back when Lincoln had Chris Bosh, and Chris Bosh was one of those guys that you could see. He was 6'10" in high school, athletic freak, could shoot the ball. He was one of those guys you could point to immediately and say that guy's going to be not only in the NBA, he's going to be a star. But at the time, you didn't even know if he was the best player on that team, because that was that 40-0 national champion team that also had Brian Hopkins, who was a heck of a talent in its own right. That same year, the Colony had a pair of kids, Darren Williams, who obviously went on and had a long NBA career, and Bracy Wright, who most people thought was the better player in high school. It sounds hard to believe now, but back then that was in the discussion. Garland, had Ike Diagu, a 6'8" kid who spent several years in the NBA, and he was kind of overshadowed.
Wait, he's from Garland?
He was Garland High.
Really? Didn't he play for the Cavs? Mavs. Big man.
He bounced around. He went to Indiana, I think, is where he started, and he bounced around. He had a healthy career in the NBA.
Post player, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Wow, I didn't know he went to Garland.
Yeah, but he was, but again, he was somewhat overshadowed because that was the same year that all these guys came out, and so I'm thinking, wow, I mean, these guys are destined for the NBA, and three of them obviously made it. Bracey and Bryan Hopkins had successful. Bracey had a quick swim through the NBA, but most of but they had long European careers as well. I was like, I'm going to be seeing future NBA stars, all the time. And then you start to think back at it, it's really a rarity, and that was an anomaly, having that amount of talent. I mean, you mentioned it is talent rich. These guys go on and excel in college, but it's so hard to make that jump all the way to the NBA. And so as I kind of go back in my memory, I get past that class, and there hasn't been that many guys that I've. Now, granted, my coverage scope it was a lot larger back then. I've been focusing on the Garland, the Mesquite, the Rowlett, the Saxe areas here for the last several years, and we've had some guys like Quincy Acey, who from Horn, who played at Baylor, and then was able to
play with the Texas Legends and the Nets, the Mavs.
But it wasn't like I was thinking when I was 22, 23 years old. Oh wow! By the time I reach my age now, I'll have seen 50 NBA players when they played in high school, and I can say I knew them then. It really is. It's such a rarity, but it's just something that you also can look back on, and it's special. But it is hard to say. To say that then the bona fide, like I say, a Chris Bosh, where you go,
for sure,
that dude's going. That's a rarity.
I'm in a similar boat as you because I was spoiled. I'm going on about 4 years here with the Star Local Media, and my first year was RJ Hampton's freshman year, and he had a lot of hype, but it wasn't like oh my god hype until about midway through his freshman year. I remember I covered Little Elm basketball. That was the first basketball game I actually covered at the high school level. And it was Little Elm against, I think, South Garland. Second actual game of the season for them. And I'm watching, and I meet up with head coach Kendrick Brown at halftime, and he's like, hey, you check out the freshmen yet? Or, no, it was right before the game. They're shooting around, doing the dunks and layup lines and stuff. And Kendrick Brown, he's like, hey, have you checked out the freshman? You seen him? And I was like, which one is he? Because RJ was just this little string bean kid, and I was like, I didn't barely even knew what Little Elm was when you told me I was covering Little Elm. I was like, oh golly. I hadn't really known too much about RJ. They don't really give out rankings to freshmen on ESPN and stuff like that. About midway through the second quarter, I was like, holy crap, this guy is really good. And then obviously midway through the season, he's averaging 25 points per game as a freshman, and he's getting offers, these top offers and whatnot. And then RJ Hampton, before you know it, he's foregoing his senior year. He's winning, being nominated for National Gatorade Player of the Year. Averaging over 30 points per game, getting offered by, every school in the book, and then obviously, so I guess technically I have covered a professional athlete.
For sure. Oh, yeah. He's technically a professional now.
Yeah, and he's the only one. I have a bunch of college studs that I've seen, that come to mind. Jason Shelley, Nick Bolton, those football stars.
Absolutely.
Nick Bolton, he was started almost every game as a freshman. The linebacker for Lone Star, he's now at Missouri. We might see him in the NFL in 2 years. He's going to play his junior year at Mizzou. He's that good. But yeah, RJ, he played with the New Zealand Breakers, going to enter the NBA draft, and he should be on an NBA roster next year. If everything goes according to plan. So even though I've really been here, 3.5, going on 4 years, the studs I saw my first year are, sophomores or juniors in college. But, RJ Hampton, he said, screw that. I'm skipping my senior year, and I'm going to go straight to the NBA after playing, pretty much half a season with the New Zealand Breakers.
I think back to when, our old sports editor, Kevin Hageland, when he got his job at The Fan, he's now a midday host as part of the KNC Masterpiece on 105.3 The Fan. When he left Star Local Media and I kind of took over, part of his responsibilities, one of the beats that I undertook was covering Allen football. Beforehand, I would only get to see Allen play maybe once or twice a year and whatnot. Kevin was obviously, all about every chance he could get to see Allen. He'd take advantage of it. So I wasn't really, though, until the 2013 season when I got to take over, full-time coverage of Allen football. And if you think back to 2013, that was a team that was quarterbacked by some kid named Kyler Murray. And by now, I mean, again, the legend of Kyler Murray is very well documented at this point. 42-0, never lost a game as a high school starter. Won 3 state championships, Gatorade National Player of the Year, and then obviously went on to have just immense success at the college level at OU, and now is just coming off an Offensive Rookie of the Year campaign with the Arizona Cardinals. And I just think back to kind of what it was like, just the early days of the Kyler Murray era there at Allen. Even before, again, back in 2012 when he was just a sophomore and making his first ever run on campus. And I don't know how many people, again, beyond just your high school football junkies and your just your Allen football fans remember this, but Kyler wasn't the starter to begin his sophomore year. It wasn't like Kyler just stepped right in on campus and just took over and it was just they were off and running. He was actually the backup to a kid named Oliver Pierce, who was actually a standout wrestler at the high school. It's like football was his quote-unquote off-season sport. Wow. And just imagine that. But Oliver Pierce was kind of a jack-of-all-trades type that had been kind of waiting in the wings to take over at quarterback, and they gave him a shot as a senior and whatnot. And I just remember Kevin coming back though when he was out doing a practice on a story on their on a two-a-day story, and that was the first thing that he was talking about. Like, I mean, Oliver's looking nice, man, but you get this sophomore that they have. He's because Kevin's a Texas A&M alum, so Kyler Murray's the son of Kevin Murray, a former A&M quarterback. So when he learned that was Kevin Murray's kid, naturally kind of took a little bit of extra interest. But just to kind of see then, Kyler was only used really as kind of like he would spell Oliver every here and then. Every few series, Kyler would get a chance to to have a drive or two to himself. But I mean, you could see the potential early on. I mean, he wasn't like, you look at what Kyler's become, and then you think back in 2012 when he was more. I mean, it was really just more of a runner than he was a passer. His arm hadn't really, I guess, discovered his gifts as an actual as an actual passing quarterback, and was used more so as a runner when he was just a sophomore. But you could obviously see the promise there, and just his speed was just otherworldly at the position, especially at the high school level. But it wasn't until Allen's, what is still to this day is Allen's last regular season loss, when they got beaten overtime by Capel back in late September of 2012, that they made a change at quarterback, and they bumped Kyler up to starter for the district opener the following 2 weeks after the fact against Plano East. And they won that game against Plano East 56-0, and then the rest was history. And it's just to think of, like, no one at the time obviously could have envisioned what would have happened with Kyler, and the fact that this kid would literally never lose a game, that Allen would go on to have what you can make a case is, it was a 57-game win streak ultimately, what that first win against Plano East was, what it launched. I mean, you can argue it's as dominant a run as any team has ever had in the history of Texas high school football, winning 57 games in a row against, 6A, 5A competition and whatnot, the UIL's largest classification. With Kyler, though, just when I think back to kind of what it was like covering him just on a routine basis, I mean, it's, you'd expect this for a kid who's accomplished what he has, but like, he legit never had a bad game. Like, and this is, again, going up against, some of the most loaded high school programs that you could throw at him, the DeSotos, the Skylines, Trinities and whatnot. There would be times when you'd have teams that, like, if you took away the ground game, then he'd just hit you over the top for 350 yards and 4 touchdowns. Or if he was having a slow day passing the ball, he just made up for it by running for 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. He was just... again, there really was no way to ever slow him down, and you always felt like that no matter the odds, because it wasn't just smooth sailing. I mean, if you're going to win 57 games in a row, you got to get a little lucky along the ways, and Devin, you've seen some of the instances firsthand, and certainly Allen along the way had the, a fortuitous bounce here and there.
The wind of God.
And just some of those crazy moments, like you were just alluding to, that the 2013 state semifinal against DeSoto, which to this day is still the best high school football game I've ever covered. And that was, Kyler stages a 15-point comeback in the fourth quarter, and, they take the lead, inside the final 30 seconds in a crazy, crazy game where, like you mentioned, Allen's lining up to punt, and the ball comes down, and it bounces off a DeSoto player, and Allen recovers it and keeps the drive alive.
Yeah, it didn't just bounce off. It stopped, and the wind blew it back, and it hit a DeSoto player who wasn't paying attention, and Allen recovered. It wasn't like they went down and made a hit. Yeah. It was one of those things that's just meant to to be. I mean, it was just one of the most bizarre plays you'll ever see.
And then DeSoto racks up like 2 personal fouls after the fact. So all of a sudden now Allen's, closing in on the red zone, and then Kyler has this 24, 25-yard touchdown run with like 20 seconds left. And that was when that was kind of the first sign of like, okay, there's something special about this kid. Like this isn't normal. Just this level of, it was really one of the first true signs of greatness from Kyler. And he had already won a state title the year before and whatnot. But that just to overcome those odds against a team of that caliber, because remember that was both Allen and DeSoto were both ranked in the top 5 nationally that year. It was as good a game as you could make in high school football. And then just thinking of, the following year when, Allen had a really, really young defense, so they were having to win a lot of games, like 48-45 and the like, and it was literally just Kyler, and just, instances like in the playoffs there where they had just this absolute murderer's row where they went through DeSoto and Arlington Martin and Euless Trinity and Skyline. That Skyline game, they were down 18 in the second half, and then they were winning the game by like 17 points. Like, who does that? That's just what he was capable of, though, man. And it's, but I still remember like his last ever game when he was, Allen was already well ahead of Houston Cypress Ranch, closing in on a 3rd consecutive state title. Kyler had done his thing, just put up just gaudy numbers, and they decided to, they sat him about midway through the 4th quarter, pulled him out and put him the backup. And I just remember looking around AT&T Stadium, which I believe I think it was the second largest crowd. I think it wasn't as big as the Pearland crowd from the year before, but it was the second largest crowd in the history of Texas high school football. And just about the entire stadium gives Kyler a standing ovation, not just to say like, you had a great game and all, but just like, wow, what an incredible 3-year run to have a career the likes of which, who knows the next time you'll see something like this. Not the fact that he just went undefeated over 3 years, but that he did so in the UIL's largest classification. It's just an unparalleled level of success that he had. And to see what he's been able to carry that on to the college level, basically had a year just like you'd see out of high school when he was won the Heisman at OU. Now he's doing his thing with the Cardinals. It's just it's pretty good. It's pretty good to be Kyler Murray these days.
Oh yeah, I can't stand when people are like, oh yeah, Kyler Murray, from Oklahoma. I'm like, no, dude, he's from Allen. Like, we have him. Texas, the DFW has him. Like, now he's always associated with Oklahoma, obviously. He won a Heisman. But I'm like, no, Oklahoma cannot have that. He's Texas.
Well, and you mentioned a lot of the guys that you've covered. If their professional days are ahead of them. Mm-hmm. We can sit there and pick out now, hey, this guy really has a chance. But it's a lot of the guys that you're covering right now have a future in pro sports that you may not know about.
For sure.
When I was covering Taylor Gabriel, who we talked about earlier, at Horn, he was arguably the second best wide receiver on that team.
For sure.
He went to Abilene Christian, wasn't heavily recruited, but played his butt off for 4 years there. Mm-hmm. Set records, NFL teams. Didn't care. Undrafted.
Wow.
Went and worked his butt off again for the Browns. Which is somewhat of a curse sometimes, but it was his blessing. And he made the team and has since, come on and proved himself. He got a big contract from Chicago a couple of years ago. But that's a guy that, when I was watching him on Friday nights, I didn't forecast him being a future NFL player. Same thing with DeMontre Moore over at Rowlett. Heck, even Marquise Goodwin. I knew Marquise Goodwin. He's one of those athletes that was destined for great things. I didn't think it was going to be an NFL career. I thought it was going to be winning the gold medal in the long jump. And he did go to the London Olympics in 2012. Mm-hmm. And actually had the longest jump in the world that year. It just didn't come at the Olympics. So he's certainly capable, and there's been rumors that he may make another run at it in 2020.
Oh, that'd be so great.
If it doesn't get canceled, coronavirus. But Marquise, he worked really hard at UT as a wide receiver, worked his way up the depth chart, became a really good receiver, and has had a nice long career. Now it's like he signed with San Francisco for a multi-year deal a couple of years ago. So there's some guys that kind of you don't see that necessarily at the high school level. As good as they are in high school, you just kind of go, they're not going to play pro. There's a couple examples. I just want to bring one quick one. It's not something that I covered on a consistent basis, but I saw Matthew Stafford play in high school, and I saw Clayton Kershaw play because Highland Park is always in with those boutique schools. But one in particular, and this was back in the 2013 playoffs in a game I think we've talked about before. But Poteet played White House, and I even had to look up just to see exactly where White House was. I knew was east. I didn't know exactly where. But White House had a quarterback that people were talking about, Patrick Mahomes.
Who?
But, you know, I mean, people were talking about it in high school circles, but not really nationally. He was a 3-star kid. It wasn't like he was a bona fide 5-star. I can pick any school in the country. He was a 3-star kid who committed to Tech, who a lot of people thought Tech wanted him because he fit their system. That was the knock on Tech for all those years. But in the one time that I got to see Pat Mahomes play, I knew he was going to play in the NFL. And not just play in the NFL, he was going to be a starter. I mean, he threw for over 600 yards in this game and 5 touchdowns. He rushed for 70 yards and 2 touchdowns. Their team ended up losing because 65-60 because, you know, the defense couldn't stop Poteet. But Poteet certainly couldn't stop Pat Mahomes in that offense either. And I remember thinking it to myself and then going down to the field, talk to Cody Groves, who at the time was the Poteet head coach, afterwards. And Cody Groves told me, he said, that kid right there, that quarterback is the best high school player I've ever coached against. And, I mean, that's high praise because, you know, these coaches, they've been around and they've seen some of the best talent, you know, out there. And, I mean, I concur. I still say Vince Young is the best high school player that I ever covered in high school, that I ever saw play in high school. I thought Pat Mahomes was the best NFL prospect I ever saw because there was something about him you could even see back then.
So around that same time, I covered a quarterback when I was at UNT, covering Denton ISD football, Gerard Hurd.
Yeah.
Goes on to play Texas, wide receiver. They moved him from quarterback to receiver. He wins back-to-back state titles as the starting quarterback. You know, he was a beast on the basketball court. I'm like, man, this dude is awesome. And I was kind of bummed to see them, you know, Texas make him move to receiver. And he had a good career at Texas. And then in getting ready for this podcast, I knew he was playing for the Dallas Renegades, obviously the XFL team here in Dallas. Well, doing some research for this podcast, 2 days ago, he was waived by the Dallas Renegades. He muffed a punt. Luckily, they didn't lose the fumble, but he muffed the punt and then lost those duties and only had 4 targets through the first 2 games or something. And I was like, man, Gerard Hurd was my guy. I thought he was going to be this super stud. Maybe not like a Kyler Murray, but I thought this guy's going to, this guy's a chance to be an NFL quarterback. I mean, but what do I know?
But he had a comparable high school career to Kyler Murray in terms of winning and the numbers he put up.
It was at the same time. I remember him. One of the best games I ever saw was them beating Highland Park in the state semifinals, the 4A semifinals at Allen. I believe it was 2013. So it was about the same time. Obviously, Kyler Murray and Allen were playing in classification above, but yeah, I thought Gerard Hurd was going to have one heck of a career. I mean, we'll see. I mean, he's still young, but it sucks that he got let go by the Renegades.
There was one more name I wanted to bring to the table before we take a quick break. And Devin, you had mentioned when a player goes pro, not really knowing what to expect out of them, depending on where they might get drafted. Now, as far as the sort of acclaim that this player had back in high school, I mean, he's about as revered a player as you'll ever find out of Plano. And I just missed him by 1 year, though. I started at the paper in 2009, right after the end of the Rex Burkhead era back at Plano Senior High School. So all you can go off is really highlights and just what you hear just in stories about Rex back then. I mean, and Rex's nickname back in high school was Superman, which is very fitting because the way that he is talked about just in Plano circles, it's legit like you're talking about a superhero. I mean, he was that highly thought of. I mean, it was at the time he was the first freshman in nearly 40 years or whatever to get meaningful playing time at the varsity level with Plano. And that's, I mean, Plano didn't just give out varsity snaps to just freshmen just like that and whatnot. So I mean, you already kind of knew that they kind of saw something special in him. He was actually a quarterback for a year before he made the move to running back, and then had as prolific a run as any player's ever had in that program. He was Gatorade Player of the Year and whatnot. And you look at then what he's done since then. And with Rex, it's not just the contributions on the field and whatnot. He's been able to carve out a 7-year NFL career despite being taken in the 6th round. He spent 4 years with the Bengals, and he's spent his last year with the Patriots. He won a ring with the Pats, a couple seasons ago against the Rams. But it's also that he has really become well known off the field for the job that he's done raising awareness for pediatric brain cancer. He's been really, really big in that area through his foundation, the Team Jack Foundation. Something that kind of started when he was at Nebraska. Befriending Jack Hoffman and whatnot. And I mean, he holds fundraisers. In his hometown every year. He's raised just untold, just millions of dollars. Towards that cause, and has really become kind of a champion. in that field. So I mean, Rex is, to talk to Rex, he strikes me as the kind of person that no matter what he had chosen to do in life, he would have been awesome at it. Yeah. He just had that kind of way about him. But it is cool to see a guy whose legacy is going to last far beyond what he accomplishes on the football field. So yeah, I mean, even though I just missed him in high school, and I mean, it sounds like quite a show, because this kid was incredible by all the sounds of it. But yeah, just in the years since, having gotten to know Rex a little bit, it's just really, really cool what he's been able to do now as far as this charitable cause of his. That is just a look at, I guess, some of the notable high school athletes that we've seen in the past that are now doing big things with the pros. It's just crazy how, I mean, it's the path that they all take is it's so different. It's never a guarantee that what you see in high school is any sort of harbinger of things to come, because so many things can happen that can knock you off the tracks, whether it's just situations or your inner circle or whatnot. So it is, you don't take it for granted when you actually do see these kids get to the pros and achieve the kind of success that they were sort of preordained with back as high schoolers. Going to shift gears, though, and talk a little bit of high school football for the remainder of the podcast, and that includes a quick interview with Frisco Reedy head coach Chad Cole. Talk about the upcoming season for the Lions, as well as some of the prep work that they've been putting in through the offseason, fresh off realignment and whatnot. And we will do that on the other side of this quick break.
And we are back with Reedy head football coach Chad Cole. Back-to-back Frisco guests. Really glad to have you on. I had to bother you all week to get you on. I know I was pulling teeth, but I'm glad you're here. Always good to talk.
You're in high demand, Coach.
I don't know if it's high demand. Camera shy. Let's call it camera shy.
No. You're always
appreciate you having me.
For sure. You're always a good interview. We're here at Kelly's Craft Tavern in Frisco, and Coach. So the first thing I wanted to ask you. So last time I really saw you, was a few weeks ago, about a month ago or so. Realignment, and you were scrambling. You weren't the only one. I know Coach Rayburn was scrambling. Other coaches were, seeing that y'all were in a 9-team district. It kind of, put some non-district schedules out of whack. Talk a little how crazy that was, because I know you were talking to multiple coaches for a week 2, correct? And you didn't have a week 2?
Week 1.
Week 1. And you were, I'm not going to drop names unless you want to, but you were talking to this, and you ended up landing Liberty. Mm-hmm. Okay, so talk about how, frantic and stressful and crazy that was.
Well, first and foremost, it's fun because you're back to football. So it's your first 2020 football action. So it's exciting, but it's nerve-wracking in the same token because, you're lining out a 2-year schedule. And, you want what's best for your program, so you're fighting and scratching to try to find the best fit. Depending on how your district's going to lay out, who you're playing. We knew we were going up. We know our, Division I is going to be an added challenge for us. So try to find some non-district games that will challenge you but won't destroy you. So it's a very difficult balancing act. I probably, hindsight, I was rolling the dice that the Colony wouldn't be in our district. Well,
Where did you think they were going to land?
Well, I didn't know. I was hoping for other things and then just wishful thinking that surely they won't put them back into that district. Yeah. And they'll go in a different direction. We can play Rudy again. It's a really good matchup for us. It's right down the road. Very convenient for us to get out of the Frisco district in non-district and play. And so it was wishful thinking on my part. So I kind of screwed that up. So, yes, the scramble was on when they flash the Colony with us in a 9-team district. I had some backup plans, but, as the scramble ensues, you can see from across the room that backup plan is not going to happen. As I approach, I'm like, okay. So, you want
to tell us what that first backup plan was, plan A?
I'm not going to name names. He's a good friend of mine, and I felt good about it. Mm-hmm. Thought we had good conversation, and it was very apparent as I head towards him that, no, that's not going to happen. So he found something better, and I had to move on down the road.
So you were kind of surprised by the Colony, but obviously there's 2 new schools paired with y'all, Denton and Denton Ryan. How kind of surprising was that?
Well, I wouldn't call it surprising, challenging, to say the least. So accepted it, got to roll with it, here we go, 9-team. I was thinking 8 for us. We came out of that Division II 9-team, and they had been in an 8-team forever. I was at Wakeland for 10 years, and we were always in an 8-team. And so didn't really even give it a second thought. So
what's the main difference between an 8 and a 9-team district? Is there any? I mean, obviously the one less district game, but is there anything different?
The fact that you're not dedicating that week 4 to everyone's bye. So now you have a rotating bye. So now that first district meeting that you have is more critical on what you draw, because now you could draw a week 3 bye or you could draw a week 10 bye, and then that makes a difference. Now, it's been, depending on how you're stacking up in the district, you could later on down the road, all right, a week 10 bye is going to be good for us because we're in the playoffs and we need a week off, or a week 9 or a week 8. You could have a perfect scenario, but you're drawing it out of a hat, so you're never going to get that.
What did you draw?
I drew 5, so pretty good.
Yeah.
Excited about that. I'm not excited about the challenging games we have before the bye, but I like where our bye landed.
You mentioned just kind of factoring in the fit as far as kind of laying out your non-district schedule. What kind of qualities do you look for in a team as far as kind of who to schedule and which sort of teams to target based on where your program is at?
Yeah, that's exactly it. You're looking for a win, number one, and then you're looking for a competitive game that will get you ready for district play. That is a winnable game. You saw the board list up there that I was chasing through, and Duncanville needs a game and South Lake Carroll needs a game. And
Duncanville needed all the games.
That's not
just like
that doesn't fit in my equation. I don't know what kind of math problem that would be where you would need to play those guys, but the Frisco Reedy Lions didn't fit.
Yeah, you said it right. Math problem, emphasis on problem.
That's right. It would be a problem. That's right.
How cool was it to be able to keep 2 Frisco opponents as the non-district matchups, Frisco and Frisco Liberty?
Really cool. Our defensive coordinator, Coach LeGrone, was not really fired up at playing Frisco High because they're a wing tee, and it's just a totally different animal that you have to prepare for. So, Coach, that really doesn't help us moving down the stretch. But they're a good rivalry, if you would call it. Most of my coaches, some of my coaches, let's say, came from Frisco High. We've got a really good relationship. It's fun. It's a fun week playing those guys because there's a lot of shenanigans that go on. It's good for our kids because they'll turn it up a notch. So love the fact that even though they're Division II, we're Division I now, we could still keep that game. And then, going back to week 1, we pick up Liberty. I had dropped a 6A opponent to pick up Liberty, and that was in that shuffle that you were talking about. Better fit for both of us. We're still in the same district, taking care of one another. Liberty's on the rise. They got a great draw. I'm very excited for those guys, friends with all those coaches, that they get that Division II route that we've had for 2 years that we really enjoyed. So excited for that and their growth, and excited to play them. Hadn't played them in a long time. So
now, you said you were at Wakeland for 10 years. So how far back does your Frisco roots go?
Good question. I had 1 year stint when I first came into the district in about 2004. And that was Coach Ronnie Mullins, our old assistant athletic director. That was his last year at Frisco High. So I had 1 year stint there, got my feet wet, found out what an amazing district this is. And then we kind of disbanded there at Frisco High when he took the assistant athletic director role. I went to Grapevine for a year, and then the connections that I made at Frisco High, being like a Mike Ferris. Dr. Ferris was an assistant principal at Frisco. He gets the principal job at Wakeland, so I had a good connection to come back.
So do you still know Ronnie Mullins fairly well?
Oh, yeah.
So Ronnie Mullins, fun fact, my roommate is a assistant coach, one of the assistant coaches at Saxe. He's a young guy, but his dad used to coach Highland Park and all this stuff, so he's got a lot of coaching connections because of his dad. Ronnie Mullins calls my roommate all the time. He just retired.
Yep.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yep. Irving MacArthur.
And so that kind of leads me into one of my next questions. So,
well, let me finish the fun fact. That's okay.
Okay, yeah.
We're sitting around that scramble table, right before the
Ronnie
action
Mullins
starts. Ronnie's there, and then he looks around, and it was like a Ronnie Mullins tree because it's Greg Pels, who's the head coach at Richardson, that's standing right beside him, and it's Stephen Anthony, who's the offensive coordinator at Richardson, that we were all on that staff together at Frisco. It's Brian Chandler, that's the OC at Liberty. It was like, hey, there's a Ronnie Mullins football tree right here. So he's made an impact on a lot of people's lives.
I feel like he knows everyone.
He does.
It was just like 2 days ago he was calling my roommate just to talk.
And his son's now at Wakeland. So
I didn't know that.
Yep.
I didn't know that. Okay, so this is a question I've been curious about, over the past year or so. So I see how much like an assistant works, a varsity assistant football coach works, during the offseason, during the season. How many hours would you say a football head coach is really putting in week to week? Y'all work a lot.
Yeah, and given our athletic coordinator role, that certainly, football probably takes a back burner for most of the spring, winter and spring, because you dive into that athletic coordinator role. So, Coach Gilchrist, Coach Rayburn, and myself were 4:30 a.m. headed to Houston, Friday morning to catch our state wrestlers. And then we brought it back home late that night. So, it's all fun because we're supporting kids and we're watching our programs grow and compete, but it does eat up some clock for sure.
Yeah,
I couldn't put a number on it. I'd have to jot it down week by week, but yeah.
Yeah, and Frisco ISD has always been fascinating to me. I have a lot of background in Garland ISD with the 7 schools there, and it seems like its success is kind of cyclical in a school district with that many schools. Frisco, though, just the rapid growth and the fact that it seems to open another high school almost every year, and I know you got 1 or 2 more on the way here in the next couple of years. When you have that many schools in the same school district, does it make it more difficult to build a consistent winner?
Yes and no. We're building quality kids, and we're working on that character piece, and we're trying to make men of integrity and better husbands and fathers and workers when they walk outside our doors. And we think and believe that if we accomplish all those little bitty things, that the success, will come. It's about talent at the end of the day. Like you said, cyclical, if you will. When we have the talent, we're going to win more football games than when we don't. When we graduate 5 offensive linemen that looked the way our offensive linemen looked a couple years ago, that had a lot to do with winning. And sometimes they're not always there, but when they are, Coach Kirkendall and his staff have done a fantastic job of finding the guys that can make it work. So, I don't know if I answered that question or not.
Now, what has, before we let you go, what has been starting a program from scratch, been like, and especially, y'all found some success real early, what you kind of just alluded to, talk about those first 2 or 3 years, how were y'all able to have so much success so early on, and what was that like, starting a program from scratch?
Well, I wouldn't trade it. It was a lot of work. I was finishing my Wakeland responsibilities in the classroom that spring that I got hired. And
Reedy wasn't even open yet, right?
We weren't open, but we got to shuffle kids over to a middle school and kind of start growing that. We opened as freshmen and sophomores, and we got to open, with a JV schedule and just build the bonds. And, our Frisco kids are so great. They're smart enough to see what's going on. They knew they had an opportunity to be on the ground floor, to put their stamp on this thing. You take Josh Foskey, for example, that quarterback we had. I mean, up until this year, he was the only quarterback for 4 years that took a meaningful snap in our program. Like, where else would that happen? And he's using that to elevate himself at Stephen F. Austin right now. But, man, from designing a helmet decal to coming up with we didn't even know how to break out a huddle. Like, what are we going to say here? I mean, and you don't think about little things like that. Like, we're out there at Staley Middle School, and I've got a couple of coordinators with me, and we're starting to work the kids out. And, all right, guys, I don't know what you want to do here. And then you throw it back on them, and then they have some ownership in it. Well, let's clap it up and say Reedy lines. All right, that sounds fantastic. And it's stuck ever since. So, man, Coach Humble, Mark Humble, that just got the Rock Hill job. You know, we talked the other day, and I just said, as busy as it is, because I hired 38 coaches, you know, in that spring. Like, that's crazy. And then that's not 38 interviews. That's, you know, 3 to 4 per position. But slow down and enjoy it, because the memories that I made, I wouldn't trade them for the world. So it's a lot of fun, a lot of work, but, you know, didn't get into this to avoid work. But the success came with having great kids that were bought in and saw the future, saw what could be. And I always said, guys, you know, all this work you're putting in, it's not guaranteeing you're going to have any success. You know, you're just laying a foundation. If you lay it correctly, the guys that come up behind you can have some success if you do it right. Well, they were like, Coach, that's cool. Let's have a little bit before I get out of here. And we had a pretty awesome year. I think that first year with seniors, we, you know, went 9-2, something like that. Pretty outstanding. So, driven kids that, you know, got great parents and great motivation to be successful. So it was awesome.
Good deal, Coach. I appreciate you coming on our 4th ever remote podcast here at Kelly's in Frisco. When we come back, we'll keep the football talk going. We'll be talking some big non-district games to look out for next season on the gridiron.
Big thanks to Chad Cole for taking the time to chat on the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast. So let's veer off the tracks one more time and let's talk some high school football. You know, the one sport of all the ones that we have going on right now that's still got a ways off from high school football season, but there's never really a bad time to talk high school football. And you know, we were just talking with Coach about, you know, realignment and the process of forming your non-district schedule. Well, you know, we now at least have an idea as to what our various teams have, you know, at the start of next season. So I don't know. Why not get a jump start and give a way too early look at some of the more notable non-district games that we'll have on the horizon for next season. You know, Bryan, we had one that came down the pipe, a bit of a late bloomer as far as you know, where a lot of this stuff kind of materialized on realignment day. You had one for you know, for the best team that you cover, Frisco Lone Star, that didn't materialize for another week or so. But boy, what a matchup that was, man. Talk a bit about yes, it's going to happen first time ever, I'm guessing.
Yeah, they've taken on Alito in week 2. And
wow.
Oh, my God. You know, it's ironic that we had, you know, Coach Cole on, you know, Frisco Reedy. You know, Alito was the team that ruined their dream season. Man, I thought just watching Reedy play that year, 2 years ago with, was it Jace McClellan and, what's his name, Earl Steele? He's committed to Texas or Texas Tech or something, man. They were just running wild, and I know he's coming back next year. Man, Alito is just this machine. And, you know, watching them play was so much fun because they were the only team that year that I saw not give it to Reedy, but be competitive with Reedy, but also beat them down at the same time. Sure. I was like, wow, man, this Alito team is a machine. And don't they have, I just saw a special, I guess Fox Sports did it or something, you know, a while back. They've had 3 consecutive brothers at quarterback. So they have, one quarterback for 3 years, another one quarterback for 3 years, another one quarterback for 2 years, and between them they have I think all 9 state championships or something like that. I mean, it's ridiculous, and I cannot wait to see this matchup. I mean, Lone Star loses Marvin Mims. They lose Jalen Ford, who's going to Texas. They lose, you know, Torrin Pittman. They lose some of their defensive guys, some of their defensive line. But, man, they're just going to reload. You know, this matchup is going to be must-see TV. It should be televised. That's how good it is. And that's going to be a good game to prepare
for sure
for that district. Granted, they don't play Denton Ryan until the very, very last game of the season.
Wow.
I don't like when you know, when district schedules are like that. I don't know if that's on purpose or not, you know, to be juicy or whatever. I don't think it is, but I'd rather prefer that game, you know, third or fourth game before the season ends, you know, with major playoff implications on the line, because who knows what, you know, I know we're talking about non-district, but who knows what will be on the line that final week of the year. But yeah, definitely that Alito matchup. Granted, and they only get 2 non-district games because they're in the 9-team district, you know, with the 6 Frisco schools, the Colony, and the 2 Denton ISD schools. So they needed to land in Aledo or a powerhouse of that nature.
That's your dress rehearsal game right there, going up against what has been one of the great high school football programs for forever, it feels like. What an opportunity for them when you look at what they were able to do last year when they announced their presence to the rest of the state by beating Highland Park. Becoming the first Texas team since, 1998 to beat Highland Park in Highlander Stadium. And then if you're able to go the following year, with the pieces that they'll have to replace, and then if they could potentially score a win over Aledo, just what a massive statement that would be for a program that's really, that is slowly becoming wanting to be mentioned in that same breath as the Highland Parks and the Aledos as far as a year in, year out juggernaut.
Before Highland Park, it was Denton Ryan. Was their non-district foe that they had lined up against when they had MJ Rivers against Spencer Sanders a few years ago. That game was at the Star. I believe it was the third district game of the year. They almost beat Denton Ryan that year when no one was beating Denton Ryan except for Highland Park, obviously. But, they really almost took them down. It came down literally to the wire. MJ Rivers had a great game. So it's kind of a tradition now. Week 2 or week 3, they don't have a week 3 non-district game, so they had to push to week 2. But it seems like for the last, decade almost, at least obviously since I've been covering Lone Star, they've had some just absolute juggernaut on their non-district schedule.
Let's see, Devin, where did you land on this, man? So as far as what's going on in your coverage area, what is a non-district game that jumped out to you?
I'll address Mesquite ISD first. There's some name programs, like Horn and Highland Park play in week 2. Obviously, Poteet and West Mesquite continue their rivalry. Now that they've got separated into different divisions. There's that Mesquite Flower Mound opening date that looks interesting. But I think, Coach Cole just said it early on when we were asking him about non-district play. He said you want to compete and you want to win, but you don't want to get destroyed.
For sure.
And he's talking about not just the scoreboard, but confidence-wise. And you look at the Mesquite ISD, Jeff Leaner still seems like he's relatively new. He's going into his 4th season, but that makes him the dean of Mesquite ISD coaches. Tim Cedars going into his 3rd year at North. Both Roddy McClain at Poteet and Chris Hudler at Horn are going into their 2nd year, and obviously Frank Sandoval's taking over at West Mesquite. So I think what Coach Cole says kind of resonates when you look at kind of their rundown and how they did non-district. These are teams that have struggled in recent years. They're still trying to get used to going into that 2nd or 3rd year of a coaching system. And so they're scheduling based on building confidence, on getting better, on teams that are on their level where they can, get off to a good start. They're not going to go out there and schedule, the teams that we're talking about, Duncanvilles and Allens and stuff like that. There's no point to it at this point in time. So, that's what it may not be a lot of sexy matchups, but it's a lot of good matchups when you look at, North Mesquite against Lakeview, for instance. That's kind of a unofficial rivalry they played the last several years. North Mesquite's going to go up against a solid team with, maybe the best running back in the state, Kamar Wheaton, and they're going to test, they're going to test themselves, but they're also going to give them a chance to win.
And then with you mentioned Allen, and it's realignment is always fascinating for them as far as filling out their non-district schedule, because they face very much the same plight as your Duncanvilles and whatnot, and that it's really, really tough for Allen to schedule teams because, teams just aren't going to be willing just to jump up and play Allen, and it's one of the big reasons why you have every year so many of the state's elite teams will draw at least 1 or 2 out-of-state opponents on their schedule, just because it's tough to find teams in state that are willing to play them. With Allen, they just last year was actually such a breath of fresh air. It was the first time since 2013 that they had played a non-district schedule of just nothing but Texas teams. They went through this run where over a 5-year span they played 6 out-of-state teams. Schools from South Carolina and Alabama, Louisiana, Florida, Utah, even. And with those matchups, you never really know what you're getting as far as how much those games will actually ultimately end up testing your kids. But I know that's something that head coach Terry Gamble kind of wanted to get away from and just get back to scheduling more Texas-based opponents. But you look at a scenario like Allen that is past realignment, where every team kind of goes into realignment with an idea as far as what their non-district schedule is going to look like, and you're just kind of hoping that nothing happens based on realignment that would rock that schedule, whether it's the number of teams that are in your district or if you just happen to wind up in the same district as a team that you've already scheduled as part of your preseason. And that happened to Allen. Both of those things happened to Allen. They were supposed to play Denton Geyer in week 1 as part of the Tom Lander Classic. Well, they wound up being put in the same district as Geyer, and they had been in an 8-team district for so long, so you really only have weeks 1, 2, and 3 set. Then they get put into a 7-team district, and that opens up week 4. So all of a sudden now Allen is scrambling to fill weeks 1 and week 4. And it wasn't until later in the later in the afternoon that that Coach Gamble was finally able to find a team to fill that Week 4 spot. It wound up being Tyler Lee, of all teams, a bit of an off-the-beaten-path name. And then for Week 1, Plano East was in the same situation with them. Plano East was supposed to open against Marcus. Well, now Louisville ISD and Plano ISD are in the same district, so they're both scrambling. Coach Gamble was able to convince Coach McCullough to take that Week 1 spot, so you get the Allen-Plano East rivalry. Still, even though they're going to
rivalry.
I mean, yeah. As far as teams that they've played each other for the last 20 years and whatnot. So in that sense, and you know what? Of the three Plano schools, East has been the one that has offered up a bit more resistance than the others. Now, ultimately, what does that really mean? When against Allen, which is lorded over that school district for so long. But at the very least, you're going to keep the Allen PISD thing going, at least in that respect. As part of the Tom Landry Classic to lead things off. But you also then through that, you got, they already had games lined up against Atascocita in Week 2. That's going to be a brand new opponent. It's a first-time matchup there, and one of the better programs down south. A team that's really, really kind of come on strong over the last 5 years or so. They've really elevated their profile. They won 12 games last season. They've been to the state quarterfinal round 3 of the last 5 years. So kind of like the Dickinson game last year, a brand new opponent that's going to offer up a bit of a different look otherwise. And then in Week 3, they get to play Cedar Hill again. They played Cedar Hill these last couple of years. That's always a really solid game, and it's pretty rare to think that Allen's not too often at a bit of a disadvantage when it comes to the quarterback battle. It's just how it's been forever with Allen. They always have just an elite talent at quarterback, but Cedar Hill has what was, I guess, newly ranked the number 1 quarterback in the entire state in Caden Salter. So that could be obviously a very, very fun challenge. Allen's going to have a brand new defense for the second straight year. They graduate just about every starter on that side of the ball. But yes, it's always interesting to see just kind of how Allen's non-district schedule shakes out, just because, again, the plight that they face, the plight that Duncanville faces, that all these high-level teams face. And then there's the aspect of, like talking with Joey McCullough, as far as the methodology that went into scheduling Allen, and it wasn't like, it's not like they they were reluctant to play Allen or anything, just because, listen, if they go out and lose by 40 or whatnot, then oh well, it's Coach McCullough has seen Allen, too many times. There's nothing about that matchup that intimidates him. What made him initially reluctant to accept that was that he didn't want to play a team that he might see in the playoffs if East makes it, because if East makes the playoffs, they're most likely going to be in the D1 bracket, and they could very well draw Allen in the first round. And you wonder how much that sort of mindset kind of plays what kind of a role it plays in how coaches decide to approach who to play in non-district. Obviously, there's cases where, like last year, Coach Rayburn was not, didn't have any qualms about playing Highland Park in the in non-district, and knowing that they could very well see each other in the postseason. Now you did see a much more competitive game in the postseason, and you see why that thought that train of thought is out there, because you don't want to give tape to an opponent of how the two of you match up that they could potentially draw from for a potential rematch. And I totally get that line of logic from McCullough's standpoint, because you saw, obviously, Lone Star kind of dominated that first meeting, and then needed overtime to beat him in the playoffs.
Best game I saw all year. Yeah.
And then you've seen kind of the same thing with Argyle, against Waco La Vega these last couple of years. They've played La Vega in the second week of the regular season these past 2 seasons. They won both of those matchups, and then they got thumped by him in the rematch in the playoffs. Now, again, it could just be coincidence and whatnot. Teams, obviously, early on in the season, you're still trying to figure out what you have and whatnot. But, you can't tell me that it doesn't help to at least have tape of how you match up against a certain team to be able to kind of draw from and figure out, okay, here's what we did wrong the first time, and here's what we can correct going forward. So that does play a factor in it as well. But yeah, then but also you got one of the more unique non-district matchups to come from that was with Marcus, who had its Week 1 opponent fall through with Plano East. They're now going to play Spring Westfield, who's one of the dominant programs from the Houston area. Obviously they haven't had the run of recent success like North Shore has and whatnot. But it's still a program that is coming off a 13-2 season last year. They got to the state semifinals before losing to Geyer, and they've won double-digit games for the last 9 years. They're always in the mix. They had one of the best defenses in the entire state last season, and then you have Marcus now, who's coming off its best season in forever. They went to the, I believe it was since 1997 was the last time they went 3 rounds deep. They were able to match that this year before running into Amarillo Tascosa. They're going to be loaded once again next year with Garrett Nussmeier, one of the best quarterbacks in the entire state, J. Michael Sturdivant. So it's a heck of a test right out of the chute to find out kind of where you stand, and it's really Marcus kind of announcing its presence as far as being one of the upper echelon teams in the Metroplex, and a chance to make a huge statement early on. Speaking of teams that have a chance to make a statement in non-district, I see you got Prosper schedule up there, Brian.
I mean, when you make it 4 rounds deep in the playoffs the year before, you gotta, and you're playing Geyer and Allen in district play, you gotta beef up your non-district schedule, and that's what Prosper did, man. They're off their the best year at least in either 5A or 6A ever. Surprised some folks and making it to 4 rounds deep facing Rockwall in the playoffs, and they're going to be tested because they have 2 brutal road games. Week 2, they play Mansfield Lake Ridge, a team they faced in non-district play before when they were a 5A team, when they were both 5A. And then in Week 3, they take on South Lake at Dragon Stadium. It's called Dragon Stadium, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay. I've been there once. But yeah, so at Dragon Stadium, and we all know about South Lake and the dominance they've had over the past, 2 decades. So they're going to be fully ready, and then they take on Arlington Lamar
that's a full-blown 6A non-district schedule.
Yeah.
It's definitely a step up from what they had been playing these last 2 years.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, because, right there in Week 6, you're playing Geyer, and then at the end, there's no slouches really in that district. You're facing a familiar team in Little Elm, who they were in the same district with when they were their last 2 years in 5A. And, Denton Braswell is up and coming, making a playoff run last year, and they're making the move to 6A. McKinney, who had a bunch of sophomore studs the year ago, so they should be fully ready. They play South Grand Prairie in Week 1, and I'm looking at that and I'm like, I'm completely looking over it because of, Lake Ridge and South Lake.
Don't sleep on SGP by any stretch.
Oh, I know for sure. Game. So those 4 matchups are brutal for Prosper. But you know what? They're wanting to get better. They're trying to prove that, hey, last year was no fluke and that we can, that they can do it again.
How about Saxe and Rowlett, Devin? How do they decide to approach the other preseason?
That they, again, kind of no real flashy, sexy matchups. I do like, though, the one in particular that I am looking forward to is Saxe against Coppell in the opener.
That's been a quality game for the last couple of years.
Just because of what they produced the last 2 seasons. I mean, that Coppell, I guess 2 years ago, Coppell wins 30-28 on a last-second, I can't remember, like 55-yard, 57-yard field goal.
Caden Davis.
Which high school kid does that? Like
Caden Davis.
Caden freaking Davis.
And he did it on a consistent basis. But that was obviously an instant classic. And then last year, Saxe gets a measure of revenge. And then another close game. They were behind going into the 4th quarter, and they win 33-30. So, it's produced 2 good games already, so that makes you want to kind of see the 3rd installment. And I'm interested to see how Saxe's offense, they went through the quarterback rotation last year, and it had some highs and lows, but they never really could, gain that consistency that they had, in previous years. I don't know if they're going to have a rotation this year because, Parker Wells is back, who split time last year. But Jordan Neighbors, who played wide receiver for most of the year, did get a look at quarterback and played quarterback at junior varsity beforehand. He was just a sophomore last year, outstanding athlete. So it'll be interesting to see what they do during the spring in terms of, because I know they'd rather not do a rotation, again, in terms of looking at those 2 guys. But, they have a 1,200-yard rusher in Sean Coleman that's back, one of the better running backs in the area. So it'll be interesting to see how that offense develops, especially if they can find a consistent quarterback, a starting quarterback, I should say. And again, that's just kind of the one that jumps out. Saxe also plays Red Oak and Denton Braswell, which is an interesting mix because they don't have really any history. But just based on the last 2 years and what that Saxe Coppell opening week matchup has done, that's one that's going to be fun to watch, I think.
We can close out with a look at, I guess, something unique that's going on up in McKinney. As far as how McKinney's decided to approach, I guess, the 3rd year of its $70 million palace, as Kendrick Johnson will call it, McKinney ISD Stadium. So they're doing something what's called the 2020 McKinney Classic. In years past, they had pit, McKinney and McKinney North against each other for that first week of the season. Well, they're actually going away from the rivalry aspect of the opening week, and they're actually playing 3 out-of-state teams. And it's a 2-day event. So that Friday, you're going to have McKinney High open up against Springdale Harbor of Arkansas. And then on Saturday, you're going to have a doubleheader with the other two McKinney schools against a pair of Oklahoma-based schools. You're going to have McKinney North against Westmore, and then McKinney Boyd plays Midwest City. I mean, as far as just, again, it's three teams that, are obviously brand new as far as opponents go, but it's three teams that I think kind of fit the bill as far as kind of where the three McKinney programs are at. It's because you'll sometimes see if you see an Oklahoma school making the trip south, it's usually like Tulsa Union or Jenks or Broken Arrow, one of the real heavy hitters up there. These three are a bit more in line with kind of where McKinney ISD's at. Westmore was 6-4 last season. Midwest City was 4-7. The most credentialed of the lot is Harbor. They were 8-4 and actually ranked number 13 in the state. By Max Preps. Now, to be fair, I'm not entirely sure what that means. I was looking back over the history of Harbor, and they had a year in 2014. They went 3-8 and finished the year ranked number 19 in the state. So
there's only 22 teams in the state apparently. So.
But yeah, nevertheless, though, it is kind of a unique deal, though, as far as McKinney looking to kind of grow the profile of that stadium by welcoming in three brand new schools from out of state to the to the area for that opening week. So yes, that is kind of a look as far as some of the an early look at some of the week 1, week 2, week 3, some of the preseason games of note that are in our coverage area. And it's like I said, there's never a bad time to get a jump start on talking some Texas high school football. So yes, that is that, and that will do it for this episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast. Yes, big thanks to Kelly's Craft Tavern. Obviously, they're starting to fill up a bit here. Folks partaking in the craft beers at the full service bar, the made from scratch foods, everything from barbecue to Tex-Mex, just all sorts of good stuff here. We're about to go chat out on some of that ourselves, actually. And yes, folks, Kelly's Craft Tavern out here in Frisco, located. Let me pull this up. At Preston Ridge on the west side of Preston Road, just north of 121. And yes, once again, a big thanks to Kelly's Craft Tavern for having us out here to record this episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast. We'll be back on Monday, and we'll, get back on track as far as the high school sports that are going on at the moment. Probably talk a little high school basketball, since it's very much the postseason is alive and well right now. We'll probably, we might have a team or two heading to state at this time next week. We shall see. Until then, folks, you enjoy the rest of your week, and we will talk to you all later.